The moment they stepped into the room, I knew something was wrong. Not because they were investigators, Julian sent those to my house before, but because this time, they walked in wearing handcuffs themselves. Two men in stiff suits, wrists bound, escorted by officers who looked like they'd aged 10 years on the way up my porch. Their boots thudded against the hardwood, and every sound felt too loud, too heavy, like the world had thickened around me. I froze halfway between the kitchen and the living room, one hand still on the back of a chair. My breath caught, shallow and sharp. Something electric crawled up my spine. The taller officer looked at me, not suspicious, not cold, but afraid. Afraid of what I might say. Afraid of what they had just learned. "Ms. Abraham," his voice cracked. "We need to talk." My stomach twisted. I didn't know what they'd discovered, not yet, but the energy in the room had shifted in a way I could feel down to the marrow. Like a storm cloud pressing against the windows from the inside. The investigators avoided my eyes. That's when I knew this wasn't about me. Not yet. One of the cuffed men, a private investigator I recognized from Julian's previous checks on me, kept shaking his head. His lip was split, like he'd been in a struggle. He tried to speak through gritted teeth. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. We didn't know what he really wanted." Julian. My brother's name punched through the air like a gunshot. I swallowed hard. "What did he tell you?" The investigator's eyes flicked up, desperate, as if begging me to believe him. "We were hired to dig into you. Find anything that could ruin you. Your accounts. Your job. Your friends. He wanted leverage. Wanted you scared." The officer beside him stiffened, clearing his throat sharply as if reminding him to stop talking. But the man continued anyway, voice trembling. "But then we found." He cut off, eyes widening at something behind me. Something, or someone. I didn't turn. Not yet. I couldn't. My pulse hammered in my ears as the silence warped tighter, pulling the walls inward. The shorter officer stepped closer. "Ms. Abraham, we received information during their arrest regarding a matter involving your brother. We need your statement before we proceed." My vision blurred for a second, like the floor dipped. Julian. Of course. He'd been spiraling for months. The drinking, the paranoia, the late-night messages that swung from love-bombing to threats in the same hour. He'd broken something inside himself long before any investigator knocked on my door. But this was different. Bigger. Darker. The investigators stared at the ground like men who'd seen something they wished they hadn't. I tightened my grip on the chair, nails biting into the wood. I had suspected this moment would come. The moment everything he'd been hiding would start bleeding into the open. But not like this. Not with them in cuffs. Not with police trembling to speak. And certainly not with the sinking realization that the game Julian was playing had gone so far past revenge, past anger, into something else. Something lethal. My throat tightened. "Tell me what you found." The room went dead still. The officer's jaw clenched. The investigators flinched. A gust of wind rattled the windows as if the house itself braced for impact. And in that thick silence, something clicked inside me, a cold, sharp truth I had been avoiding for too long. This wasn't a trap for me. It never was. It was collapsing around someone else entirely. And I knew exactly whose life was about to unravel. People say childhood shapes us, but mine didn't shape me, it carved me. Slowly. Quietly. Like water wearing a waystone. Julian Abraham was the sun in our household. Every morning began with his laughter echoing through the hallway, our mother's voice trailing behind him like a warm breeze, praising, always praising. "Look at Julian, so smart. Julian, you're incredible. Julian, you're gifted." The entire house bent toward him, like flowers reaching for light. And me? I was the shadow standing just outside that glow. It wasn't that I wasn't talented. I was the kid who fixed broken radios by 9, who coded small puzzle games by 12, who solved problems nobody asked me to solve. But talent doesn't matter when the spotlight never angles in your direction. My victories felt like whispers in a home filled with the thunder of Julian's applause. Whenever he won something, a school trophy, a football match, even a participation ribbon, the whole family celebrated like they'd birthed a prodigy. Cake on the table. Lights on. Music. Laughter spilling into the night. When I quietly published a small tech project online that got featured on a local blog, I showed it to them with a stupid spark of hope. "Oh, nice," Dad said without looking up from his phone. Mom didn't even pause stirring the pot. "And Julian?" He smirked like he pitied me. That smirk stayed with me through the years, a small, sharp blade sliding under the ribcage of my confidence. As teenagers, he became the charming extrovert, the golden boy who could do no wrong. I became the quiet problem solver, the girl who observed things too deeply. People liked Julian instantly. People trusted him instantly. And he craved that. Needed that. Fed off it. But beneath all his brilliance was something I didn't recognize until much later. A twitch in his pride whenever I succeeded. A stiffness in his jaw when someone complimented me. A glare when I got a rare moment of attention. He hid it well. Everyone saw him as the good, loyal brother. I saw him shapeshifting, smiling wide but watching me like I was a locked door he wasn't allowed to open. There was one moment I'll never forget. I was 16, working quietly on a robotics project for a regional competition. Julian walked in, leaned on the doorframe, and said in that smooth, honeyed voice of his, "You know no one actually cares about this stuff, right?" He said it like a joke. But the way his eyes flicked over the wires, the way his jaw tightened. He cared. Because he hated anything that made me stand tall. Our family didn't notice. They never did. The imbalance became so normal, so routine, that even I stopped expecting anything different. I learned to be self-sufficient, to validate myself, to applaud my own wins in empty rooms. And Julian learned that my independence threatened him. Years later, long before the day those investigators walked in wearing handcuffs, I looked back on these memories and finally understood what I never saw growing up. Julian didn't want to be better. He just wanted me to be smaller. But at the time, I was just a girl trying to survive a family who never looked in my direction long enough to realize I was drowning in silence. I didn't know then that Julian's jealousy would one day twist into something far more dangerous. Something that would force strangers to put him in the very handcuffs he thought he could aim at me. Adulthood didn't magically fix anything, but it gave me distance, enough to breathe, enough to remember who I was without the weight of Julian's shadow pressing into my spine. I built my life from the ground up. A real career. My own apartment. A reputation earned by work no one gifted me. While Julian's life, once polished like a trophy, began to crack. It started small, failed investments, a business falling apart, late-night arguments with creditors. But Julian had a talent for rewriting his own failures. He pointed at me like I was the cause of every stumble he took. "You always think you're better," he snapped once during a family dinner. I wasn't. I just wasn't collapsing like he was. Then came the tension, heavy, invisible, stretching between us. I ignored it. I kept working, kept climbing, built partnerships, secured contracts, made a name that was finally mine. And that's when the strange thing started. First, an email from a company I'd never contacted, asking for verification of identity. Then a warning from my bank about an attempted data request. A coworker pulled me aside one afternoon, her expression tight. "Someone called HR pretending to be you," she whispered, "asking for your employment file." I laughed at first, a dry, confused sound that didn't feel real. Who would do that? Why? Then a cousin messaged me late at night. "Amora, weird question. Why is someone asking about your past relationships?" My stomach dropped. Hard. It didn't feel random. It felt designed. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I scrolled through the emails again, the inquiries, the requests, the fake verifications. A cold realization settled over me, a truth forming like frost on glass. Julian. He had always been predictable in his resentment. And now that his life was folding in on itself, his desperation had to go somewhere. But I didn't have proof. Not yet. Still, every instinct pulsed with warning. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes. Every unknown number calling my phone felt like a threat dressed in silence. Something was happening. Someone was scraping at the edges of my life. Trying to peel it open. Trying to twist it. And whoever was looking into me wasn't searching for truth. They were searching for a weapon. The truth came in pieces, sharp enough to cut. I was in the office when my colleague, Rena, approached me with a sealed envelope. Her voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. "Amora, you need to see this." Inside was a thin report, not official, not government level, but well-structured. Private investigator formatting. My breath thinned as I flipped through pages filled with printed screenshots, Timelines, background checks. My life. Dissected. Observed. Monitored. But it was clean. Flawless. Almost painfully uneventful. The investigators had dug into every corner. Finances, work history, travel, relationships. There was nothing to expose because I had never lived the way Julian needed me to look. But there was something else tucked inside the file, a second section. Unlabeled. Hidden between two blank pages. Rena pointed to it, hesitation trembling in her fingertips. That part wasn't meant for you. It was found during an internal audit. It has your brother's name all over it. Julian Abraham. The pages weren't about me, they were about him. Unpaid debts. Unfiled taxes. 2 shell companies. A suspicious property purchase under a variation of his name. And most disturbing, financial transfers connected to a flagged account overseas. My pulse thundered in my ears. Julian had hired investigators to dig up dirt on me, and instead, they had stumbled into the swamp he was buried in. Rena swallowed hard. Whoever hired them didn't expect this. They weren't looking for his secrets. They were just supposed to destroy you. Pieces clicked together like locks snapping shut. The strange emails, the HR calls, the false requests for information. The smear attempt. The desperation. Julian had set a trap for me, but he had stepped into it first. I stared at the file, the edges trembling between my fingers. His life wasn't unraveling because of me. It was unraveling because he tugged the wrong thread. And that's when I realized, Julian had hired the wrong people. The shift happened quietly, so quietly that Julian didn't notice the world tilting beneath him. But I did. I saw it in the way the shadows around him sharpened, in the way his phone buzzed a little too often, in the way he kept glancing over his shoulder like guilt had finally grown a spine. The investigators who once tried digging into my past suddenly weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him. It started one afternoon when I stopped by a cafe near my office. I caught sight of a familiar face through the window, one of the investigators who had questioned my landlord weeks earlier. He wasn't watching me. He was across the street, phone in hand, eyes locked on Julian's car. Julian didn't notice. He was too busy arguing loudly on a call, pacing in tight circles like a man strangled by invisible hands. I slipped away before he saw me, but something heavy followed me home, settling in my stomach like a warning. The next day, another investigator showed up outside my workplace. Not approaching me, just watching the parking lot. Watching Julian. A week later, my neighbor mentioned a man in a suit knocking on Julian's door while Julian pretended not to be home. And then the letters started. Not for Julian. For me. A regulatory office sent a formal inquiry addressed to Amora Abraham, potential witness. Then a law firm emailed me, asking if I was available for a voluntary interview regarding a concerning financial matter. My hands went numb reading it. I wasn't a suspect. I wasn't a target. I was a witness to something I didn't even understand yet. Julian called me that evening, voice shaking under forced anger. Are you talking to people about me? No, I said carefully. Why? What's happening? He hung up. That's when I knew. He was scared. Not annoyed, not jealous, scared. Days passed with little moments that didn't fit together yet but felt wrong all the same. A black sedan parked near my building longer than it should have. 2 investigators showing up at my office, but they didn't ask for me. They asked for someone who had recently been in contact with Julian. Paranoia began to peel Julian open. He started showing up at our parents' house without warning, sweating, restless. He kept insisting people were misinterpreting his finances, twisting numbers, coming after him because of success. But success isn't something Julian had anymore. And paranoia doesn't grow out of nothing. Every time I tried reaching out, he shut down. Every time I stepped back, something else came forward, a new email, a new letter, a new clue that whatever storm was building had my name written in the edges. And somewhere beneath the surface, I felt something tightening. Like a bowstring pulled too far back. Something was coming. Something big. And it wasn't hiding from me, it was circling me. I tried to sleep that night, but the air felt wrong. Heavy. Pressing. And then, just before midnight, a knock echoed through my apartment. Slow, firm and deliberate. Not frantic like Julian. Not polite like a neighbor. Something in me froze. Because that night, the knock on my door didn't belong to who I expected. I opened the door expecting the knock to belong to Julian, his panic, his paranoia, his unraveling self. But instead, it was them. The investigators. Only this time, they were the ones in handcuffs. 2 officers stood behind them, badges out, expressions stone flat. The hallway light flickered once, as if the building itself recoiled from the scene. One investigator kept his head low, cheeks red with humiliation. The other wouldn't look at me at all. Amora Abraham, the lead officer asked. Yes, I whispered, my voice somehow smaller than the moment. Behind the officers, footsteps thundered up the stairwell. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Julian. He shoved past a neighbor, breath ragged, eyes wild. What did you do? He barked at me. This is you. Don't act innocent. His finger shook inches from my face. In that moment, he didn't look like my brother. He looked like a man running from a monster that happened to share his reflection. One officer stepped forward sharply. Sir, back up. Now. Julian ignored him. You think you're smarter than everyone. You think you can ruin me? You think. Sir. The officer's voice cracked through the tension like a whip. But Julian wasn't hearing anything. The fear had made him deaf. You set me up, he screamed, voice echoing through the floor. You paid them. You made them lie about me. You. The officer exhaled, tired of the chaos. Mr. Abraham, your sister didn't hire anyone. She's the victim here. Julian went silent mid-breath. I felt my own lungs freeze. One of the handcuffed investigators finally spoke, voice trembling. We never should have taken the job. The officer explained the rest. Julian had paid the investigators under the table to dig into my records, bank accounts, property, medical history, even encrypted files. Everything illegal. Everything traceable. And during their unauthorized investigation, the officer continued, they uncovered multiple criminal discrepancies. Not about you, Ms. Abraham. His eyes slid to Julian. But about him. Julian staggered backward like he'd been punched. What the hell are you talking about? His voice cracked, brittle. I hired them to expose her. Not. To expose what? I said quietly. Julian, what were you trying to prove? He looked at me then. Really looked. His face was sweat and panic and something else. Something like regret trying to claw its way out but failing. Our parents arrived moments later, breathless and confused. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad demanded explanations the officers couldn't give on the spot. The hallway became a storm, voices colliding, neighbors staring, the investigators being led away in shame, and Julian clutching his hair like the world had broken open beneath him. Stop this, my mother cried. Someone explain what's happening. Julian pointed at me again. But weaker now. She ruined everything. No, the officer corrected coldly. You did. The silence that followed felt like a long, aching bruise. I looked at my brother, trembling, desperate, trapped by consequences he never imagined would flip onto him. And that's when the officer spoke the words that made my skin go cold. Mr. Abraham, when they dug illegally into your sister's data, they uncovered financial fraud, forged signatures, and misappropriated accounts connected to you. My mother sank to her knees. My father's face went ghost white. Julian stepped back until his shoulders hit the wall, breath coming in shallow, broken bursts. Julian. I whispered. Please tell me they're lying. He said nothing. Not a word. Just a choking sound that didn't reach the air. The officer glanced at us, then lowered his voice as if bracing us for impact. What they revealed next shattered whatever was left of our family. The officers led the investigators farther into the hallway, and for a moment the world felt suspended, like the air itself refused to move until someone spoke the next devastating truth. That someone was the detective who arrived seconds later. He carried a thick black folder. Heavy. Overstuffed. Dangerous. Mr. Abraham, he said, voice level, we need to discuss the financial discrepancies uncovered during the unauthorized investigation. Julian blinked rapidly. What discrepancies? I run a legitimate business. The detective opened the folder. The papers made a soft, horrifying rustle. He turned the first page to show my parents. My mother gasped so hard she staggered into the wall. My father didn't move at all, just stared as if his body had shut down. Over $200,000, the detective began, moved from your charity's account into personal holdings. Funds intended for homeless youth. My stomach plunged. Charity? Youth programs? The cause Julian always boasted about, always used for praise, always flaunted at dinner tables. He used that money. My brother opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. That's a lie. Someone forged that. The detective turned the next page. Here are the forged signatures. Mom let out a soft, breaking whimper. Dad leaned forward, gripping the folder like it was a lifeline. And here, the detective continued, are the emails requesting falsified invoices. He flipped again. And these are the transfers sent to a private gambling site registered under a shell account in your name. Julian's teeth chattered. Actually chattered. I swear, I didn't. But truth has a way of showing in the cracks of a person's voice. And my brother's voice was splitting apart. One of the handcuffed investigators finally spoke up. He's lying, the man said quietly. He hired us to dig into Amora so he could claim she was laundering money. He wanted to show she was unstable, reckless, dangerous. Julian lunged toward him, but an officer held him back. Shut up, he screamed. You took my money. You work for me. No, the investigator said. We worked for whoever paid the second fee. Everyone froze. What second fee? Dad whispered. The investigator lifted his cuffed hands slightly. We were paid a larger amount to disclose everything. My skin prickled. By who? The investigator's eyes slid to me. And suddenly I understood. I never paid them. I never hired anyone. But my clean records. My encrypted files. My documented life. Those became the reason regulators flagged Julian. My data didn't convict him. His own crimes did. My existence, clean and untouched, became the mirror that revealed every false shadow he tried to cast. Mom turned to Julian with trembling hands. You try to frame your own sister. Her voice cracked into a whisper. Your own blood. I didn't, it wasn't, I just needed help, I just needed. He sank onto his knees, fingers digging into his hair. For a moment, I didn't see a villain. I saw the brother I grew up with. The boy who used to sneak me candy under the dinner table. The teenager who used to walk me home after school. But that boy was long gone. Replaced by a man drowning in his own lies. I felt my chest tighten painfully. Not with anger, but with grief I didn't know how to hold. I kneeled slightly, just enough to look him in the eyes. Julian, I whispered. Why me? Why would you do this to me? His mouth trembled. A tear slid down his cheek. But no answer came. Not one. Just silence. And fear. And the terrible realization that he never thought I'd fight back, because I never had before. Dad stepped forward. You nearly destroyed your sister's life, he said, voice shaking. For what? Money. His next words came out like they were scraped from his soul. Or because you hated how she succeeded without you. Something inside Julian broke then. I saw it, in the slump of his shoulders, in the way his breath left his body like a confession he couldn't speak. The hallway was silent except for distant sirens, and my mother's quiet sobbing. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. Because betrayal doesn't explode like a bomb. It sinks slowly, like a stone tied to your heart. And as I watched my brother collapse under the weight of what he'd done, one truth carved itself into me like a wound. He didn't just betray me. He never loved me the way I loved him. Tears blurred my vision, and the world softened into a painful smear of colors. But then, the detective closed the folder, and his next words made my blood run cold. Ms. Abraham, there's something else you need to know. That sentence, that tone, that look, it was the kind that warned me my heartbreak was only just beginning. The detective's words hung in the air like a quiet bomb, and for a moment no one breathed. Ms. Abraham, he said, we traced multiple accounts your brother used. One of them lists your name as a beneficiary, without your consent. My jaw tightened. I didn't need a detective to translate that. Julian wasn't just stealing. He was preparing a way to drag me into the mud with him if everything went wrong. A backup scapegoat. A soft target. Me. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. My father whispered, Julian, what have you done? Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He stared at the floor like it held the only version of the truth he wished existed. The officers moved slowly toward him. This is an active investigation, the detective said. You are being taken in for questioning. Julian jerked back as if waking from a nightmare. No, no. You can't arrest me. I'm the victim here. She set me up. She's always been jealous of me. Jealous. The old wound. The same old weapon. But this time, it barely cut. Because now everyone had seen the truth. Mom stepped toward me, face tight and blistered with panic. Amora, can't you just tell them you knew? Or that you agreed? He's your brother, sweetheart. Her voice cracked on the last word. Dad nodded desperately. Maybe if you say you didn't want to press charges, maybe they'll go easier on him. There it was. The familiar tilt of the world. Julian's mistakes were accidents. My boundaries were cruelty. My silence was betrayal. His betrayal was forgivable. The same old script. But something inside me finally moved. Something that had been buried, suffocated, dismissed for years. I straightened, my breath steady. No, I said quietly. Mom blinked. What? No, I repeated. I won't lie. I won't protect him. Not this time. Her eyes shone with disbelief, as if I'd broken some sacred family rule. Amora, please, he's your brother. Yes, I said, my voice low but solid. He's my brother. And he tried to destroy my life. Dad stepped closer, anger rising in his throat. You're really going to let him go to jail? I swallowed the burn behind my eyes. I didn't put him there, I said softly. He did. The officers pulled Julian to his feet. He screamed my name like a curse, like a last plea, like a drowning man reaching for the nearest hand. But I didn't move. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally understood something. You can drown trying to save someone who's pulling you under. Mom sobbed. Dad kept shaking his head, as if denial could reshape reality. I watched as the hallway filled with the echo of Julian's shouts, the sound bouncing off the walls until the officers carried him out the front door. The moment they crossed the threshold, the house fell into a silence so thick it felt physical. No one looked at me. Not my mother. Not my father. They stared at the door like everything they knew had been dragged out with him. Maybe it had. I kept my eyes on the empty space where my brother had stood. The place where every lie he ever told had finally collapsed. Mom turned toward me slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. You could have helped him. I met her stare evenly. I did, I said. For years. She flinched like I had struck her. Dad stepped between us, his grief spilling into anger. You've broken this family. No, I whispered, stepping back. I've stopped breaking myself. The words tasted like iron and truth on my tongue. The detective approached me then, offering a card. Ms. Abraham, he said gently, if you need support during the process, call us. You're not in any trouble. You're the victim here. Victim. I'd never allowed myself to consider that before. When he left, the door shut softly behind him, but the weight of everything that had happened pressed against my chest. My parents stayed frozen, clinging to their version of the world. And I stood alone in mine, finally, painfully free. I stepped outside, breathing in the cold night air like it was my first breath in years. Because maybe it was. The porch light flickered overhead, casting long, fractured shadows across the pavement. I thought about Julian. About the investigators. About everything that led to this night. He wanted to expose me. He wanted to ruin me. But the truth is simple. Julian set out to destroy me, and instead, he uncovered the truth about himself.